Take it away, RJ. We've got an audio problem. Let me see if I can fix it really quickly. Okay.
Also, Mel was
Okay.
cam girl. I thought.
Yeah, that's
All
no
right.
sound.
I think we fixed the audio now. I think so.
What?
Okay,
What did she say?
yeah. Let's see if everyone is hear this. Uh, papa, everyone knows. Can everyone hear that? That's from Oliver.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, indeed. You don't want to give. I think if I were ever in the same room with Lynn Morel Miranda, we would probably geek out because he's a hyper musical guy too, and so I'd be running
Yeah,
amok.
the audio's fixed. Thank you guys for
Okay,
your patience.
Is that the Hamilton guy?
yay! Yeah. So anyway, as I was saying about replacing Darwin, I've been as I screwed up a few weeks ago in misreading a footnote. Finally, I'm on to the actual footnote 9, where this is this long half a page worth of references that basically are documenting kind of the history of how people worked out what chromosomes were. The irony part is that it's actually, I'll put my thing up here so you can kind of see it's the upper part of the page here, all this part in here, boop, boop, boop. And it's fairly fine print and confusing notes because it's always masses of semicolons, so you have to divide it up to find out what's what. Sometimes they're in standard notation, other times they're web links, especially for some of these older works that are actually, he could have just listed it as 1902, but instead he puts a web page up for it. And then there's some stuff where he just leaves things
The
off
good old internet in
entirely.
1902.
Yeah, he had a thing where he inadvertently inserted number 1913 in a biological bulletin thing where it doesn't belong. So he was just getting things wrong, left off the date completely on another stuff, slipped a quotation mark in the wrong spot right in the middle of the journal name. Uh, I think he's been a little bit sloppy. But as even the master can make such sloppiness once in a while. This is error is human. To correct requires sound method. Anyway, most of the stuff was not available open access. I had listed some of the earlier things about Morgan's material that was actually quite interesting to put a lot of these historic papers up. But the one that was available that I put into the link is the tetranucleotide hypothesis of centennial. Nice little paper on the troubles that scientists had working out these funky little nucleotides that they were finding in biology, and like, were they the same amount all the time? Were they equally balanced or not? And what does that mean? Of course, it's ultimately relating to DNA because those are what the nucleotides are part of, and RNA. So finding out what measured up with what was a fascinating issue. And this was really quite an interesting little article. I almost wish that Jensen had read it because all he used it for was just a kind of a generic comment, not for any detailed understanding of the difficulties of science. So I'm getting a pattern here. Oh, and we're up to 1.1 sources per page on the on the references. It's beginning to
Huzzah.
creep up. Anyway,
Well,
um,
that's
that's about
something,
where.
I guess.
Yeah, that's where that goes. The second part of the show, which we'll also skip past because I want to get to the debate part because that was actually what was keeping on my mind. I finally put the linkage up to Cserhati's 2019 comment in refutation of that James Downard guy who was snarking at me about the reptile mammal transition, which Standing for Truth actually brought to my attention. I didn't know that he had actually written a rebuttal
Wow,
to what we
that's
talked
neat.
about in the book. And
Wait, isn't Standing for Truth that one guy?
he was the SpongeBob's image guy that I think he's changing his logo to like a normal boy now.
Wait,
Good old
what's he
SpongeBob
doing?
image guy.
Didn't he try to promote the flat Earth?
No.
No,
This is that.
he's
no.
a Kent Hovindista, so he's against flat Earth stuff.
He's an intense channeler of Jensen and Tompkins and Sanford and Carter and all the rest in the genetic entropy biz. I mean, if you'll never have to read any of those creationist books. You just listen to Standing for Truth, and you will get all of their arguments presented secondarily because he copies them. Anyway, Cserhati thing, the thing he put up is the evolution of the middle ear bones in the mammals from jaw bones in reptiles, and he's still basically toeing the line that no, they're not homologous to the articular-quadrate, that the genetics do not support it, that it's all a terrible claptrap, and anybody can follow up on that. I already had all the sources and stuff in it from another context. I'll just read you a little bit of his argument here. His summary: some evolutionists, such as James D., claim that there is evidence for uniform development of the middle ear bones in both reptiles and mammals from the same tissue. Thus, they claim that mammals retain the development of the middle ear during embryonic development from reptiles. However, even according to our critics' own sources, it is contested as to which precise tissue the middle bones come from in both animal groups. The bones of the middle ear somehow had to appear on the other side of the eardrum. If indeed reptiles evolved into mammals, these bones are regulated individually, so they do not necessarily move as a single unit. No theory exists as to how the regulation of the bones is rewired to transition from chewing to the transmission of sound to the inner ear. There is also no explanation as to how the musculature, innervation of the types of joints in these muscles also change between the reptile and the mammal stage. This is because the middle ear is an irreducibly complex design
No, it
system.
is not.
For transmitting sounds in mammals, whereas its function is entirely different in reptiles. Once again, evolutionists must force the data to fit their preconceived ideas of the evolutionary transition from reptiles to mammals. A closer look shows that mammals are very different in structure from reptiles because they had a separate origin. This shows that mammals were created separately from reptiles. Even when we look at the scientific details, evolution doesn't measure up, and creation theory is vindicated. Hey, okay, Tornado, what's your drink call?
Considering we have a mechanism for the, ear bones, do the pharyngeal gill pouches mean anything to these numpties?
No.
They deny those, so.
Yeah, well, also, I mean,
they just give it the middle finger. And
it sounded like he was completely glossing over the probanic gnathids, like in their entirety.
All those transitional fossils of the mammalia forms and early mammals that
let us say Cserhati is not
don't have the middle ear yet.
Yeah, it sounds like he's just saying you have reptiles, you have like modern reptiles, and you have modern mammals. Okay, yes, but let's look at the fossils. And he was just kind of like, well, there are some contested issues, and we don't know everything.
Yeah, see, the interesting thing is it didn't do, for one thing, the embryology shows that the bones move as a unit. And this was the point that Hopkins pointed out back in the 1980s. That was the thing where he was snarking against Duane Gish when he was trying to make exactly that kind of an argument about them jumping across the membrane. No, it doesn't work that way. What you had was the articular-quadrate jaw hinge was joined by the one on the outside, the dentary squamosal hinge, which eventually becomes the dominant one. So you have this passive little blob that becomes more and more marginalized and trivialized, and so it's losing its normal connections. The point is, in order to make use of it as a vibration system, there's a whole lot of things that happen, and the same things happen over and over again in the various organisms that use these things for auditory. In fact, a lot of the early organisms don't necessarily work out. There's a big debate about how many of the early tetrapods could hear very well, the early amphibians, because they didn't have some of the same connections. And you got this huge time frame between the time that the articular quadrate is ceasing to be a functional jaw hinge, as it's just kind of laying in there in the skull, until it starts being used more and more and being pulled in with its connections to the cartilage, and they can trace the forming in the fossils as to how much it's still holding on to the cartilage even in adulthood. That there's just a huge amount of material in that, which we have cited in Evolution Slam Dunk, as well as alluded to in a certain teeny tiny little book that
I have other problems with that whole issue. Never mind the fact that any creationist who dares use the word irreducibly complex is automatically talking shit.
Well, and worse, Behe doesn't claim that. Behe has a very limited sense of what he wants to use as his talking points, and the jaw-ear transition is not one of them. So Cserhati is trying to expropriate a term and not deal with the details. We will go into further detail in volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, where we will have that in the section on, guess this is what happened after we published the book stuff.
Yeah, that'll definitely go in part the first chapter. Yeah.
So that's the normal business out of the way, because I'm still running off of my adrenaline high from yesterday's debate, because I think, first of all, I think Jeff had as much as fun. That was his first debate. And he was coming at, he was doing a lot of background study, and he was asking me about certain topics. He was afraid they might be talking about neo-Darwinism a lot, and that wasn't an area he was terribly familiar with. So I was getting him some references and things that were getting him up to speed on that and the history of it. And also saying, don't worry, I'll be there to kind of pick up the slack on some of these items. Meanwhile, we had frickin' Frack over in the intelligent design.
Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah, holy moly. Maddox literally trotted out the same pre-recorded PowerPoint that he had been using against me, that he read kind of live. And so he has the same spiel where he's got his little images and he's got his little argument. The problem is he had trouble getting the damn thing started, and there was back feedback. And so you were getting this double bit. It took like a couple of minutes.
Oh God, it's like Kent Hovind.
Yeah. Meanwhile, and Jeff had a PowerPoint. He put that up for images. I theoretically could have done that, but it's not an area that I was unfamiliar with. And so I could just wing it based upon what we had available. And plus I wanted to hear closely of what was going on and offer the comments in the live chat to pay close attention to that part. So Jessie, on her end, she's a flibberty gibbet, ancient astronauty, believed all the London hammer. She trotted out the London hammer.
Do they also bring out the forward spark plug?
No. Instead, she brought up the aluminum alien landing gear.
Aluminum alien landing gear.
Yeah, she did not claim that it was landing gear. She just says that it's terribly mysterious and that it completely obliterates the conventional evolutionary framework. Well, it most probably the front end of an old Russian backhoe plowing thing, that there were these aluminum teeth on the front end of it, and one of them had broken off when they were clearing land in Romania back in the old communist days, and it got buried down in a thing that eventually got dug up as if it were part of a mastodon deposit. And,
RJ, you see, this is the reason I don't watch debates. I'd be popping blood vessels in my eyes
yes,
if I
aneurysms.
watch these things. Yeah. So
Jackson's head just
so
shoots off.
The funky part was that so much of what Jesse was coming up with was new claptrap. I had not heard about this aluminum thing. It was put out. Oh, let me tell you where it got put out. It was on
Daily Mail, right?
The Ancient Aliens series on the History Channel. They were the ones that really started popular.
I think I found her secular source, and it was thedailymail.com.
Oh yeah, that's the one that she linked to in the video, and I tracked that one down. The Fox News even repeated it, although they were aware of the problems with it. And then
Fox News.
Yeah, she didn't link to that. She only linked to one source. And then another one here. Hold your seats on this one. Here, one of the reasons why we're supposed to be doubtful of human origins, being the evolutionary model, is that the Greeks developed clay roof tiles earlier than had been thought.
What?
I'm not making this up.
Oh,
I hate
I
everything.
heard that before I left. Go
That
watch
was
stream.
later on, and she made a big deal of it. She was coming back in the comments in the video afterwards, where she was responding to me. Well, here it is. Here's the source on that clay, and the source turned out to be a Google search of the topic, and so there's a page full of various of scholarly papers that were on these tiles and stuff from the 1950s and that, which I'll look into in due course. But I asked her, which one of these do you think is supporting your contention that the young Earth creationist model of human origins is correct? Would you please point out which one of those I'm supposed to be looking at?
That's my stupid for the week right there.
Oh yeah,
the whole week.
And so and they brought up, and another one where you could see the look on my face when she made the mistake of bringing up Mesoamerican pyramids. And I was like a kid at a candy store, because holy smokes, do you realize the turf you're running in on? Colton, how did you like my handling of that issue debate?
I liked the pyramid thing, especially with how you pointed out how what was her argument exactly? Like, they're all within 8 degrees latitude.
Oh yeah, they're aligned. They're aligned to the cardinal points, and they're the same thing that built in these different cultures, and of course they aren't.
Yeah, it was weird.
In fact, unlike the Egyptians that have only basically 3 phases. Here's some.
I can feel my blood pressure rising just in this conversation.
I know you would have just gone plump. For me, I was in my element. I was delighted. I think Jeff was just happy to kind of sit back there, and he was just watching what some of these things were going on here. If he'd had a bowl of popcorn, I think he probably would have lit into that.
RJ, that was actually getting me angry because it was so dumb I couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
It was the bloody Nathan Thompson debate all over again.
And
the Nathan Thompson debate. This should be.
Erica did a double team debate with Nathan Thompson. I can't be bothered to remember the R2 people. It was not fun. It was stupid.
You know, I the only thing that I wonder is
how bad was it?
Why do I never get invited to these things?
Just lucky, I guess.
Yes.
I suppose.
Yeah. Well, and the advantage that
although I would ask them for a discussion. I wouldn't do a time debate. I don't put up with that crap.
Yeah. The advantage that I had was that so much of the claptrap that was being presented I was really familiar with already. I wasn't anticipating having a discussion of Mesoamerican pyramids, but because I knew about that because I studied the Eric von Däniken Ancient Astronaut set. That keep on trying to argue that somehow or other anybody that builds a pyramidal shaped structure anywhere on the planet is all part of this world culture of super science that existed in the ancient past thanks to our alien
And yet they could only
forebears.
build things out of like mud brick for some reason.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that the architectural
I'm wondering
styles
why
of these
if they had metal tools, why didn't they have metal buildings?
Right. Or glass, any of this.
The interesting thing about the Egyptians, of course, is that they built out of stone. They had a ton of bloody limestone available. And so they were the ones that really innovated building stone structures off the thing. And so what you had was your burial platform, which was a mastaba that you would bury somebody in the ground and build a big block over it that looked really impressive. And then they were near areas where there were natural features that were big pyramidal hillocks. And that apparently inspired them in part. You're going to make an artificial mountain. So Imhotep, who, by the way, some creationists argue is Joseph in their rearrangement of the chronology. So that's how this ties into biblical creationism, by the way.
What?
Yeah, what? Imhotep was the architect for the step pyramid at Saqqara, where he had the bright idea, hey, what if we build a mastaba and then build a smaller one on top and a smaller one on top and a smaller one on top, and we build a little artificial mountain that way. And it was the first big pyramidal structure, small compared to the Great Pyramid.
Is it wrong if I want Thanos to be real?
Yeah. Well, you're about as close to it as Jesse was getting to actual prehistory on this one. She was just a monument to trivial secondary citation. Anyway, this eventually got regularized as a pure pyramid, which looks cool, especially if it's covered over with white limestone. All of which had been ripped off when the Muslims came in and conquered Egypt and used it as a rock quarry to make the mosques down in Cairo. Anyway, there was the bent pyramid and various others. It took them a while to figure out what angle to do to keep the damn thing from falling apart. And so there was a learning curve. If you read Lerner's work on the Egyptian pyramids and that, there's a huge, it's as much of transitional forms and stages of development as you would find in an evolutionary context. It doesn't all happen all at once.
No,
Then
RJ,
later on,
there's separate kinds of
the
art.
later Nubian dynasties and that kept up with this little pyramid building tradition in the south, in the Sudan and that. So you get these relatively steep but relatively small pyramids that were built in that phase. Now we're talking about like 600 or 700 BC, something like that. It was a long time after the main pyramid building age, where the tradition went on. Meanwhile, over in Mesoamerica, totally different thing. These are not building out of big stones. They're building out of small things stacked up in very shallow, initially. All the stuff that you find at Teotihuacan is like that angle. They're not like that. And the Maya and Olmec culture, that Olmecs and then Maya, I don't think the Olmecs actually built much in the way of larger pyramid structure. You find the notion of building little artificial moundlets popping up even in Ohio and others, where there were obviously communication trails back and forth, obsidian trades, and there was a whole bunch of stuff. It was a huge interconnected bit. But the Maya,
I even found some of that obsidian here in Louisiana.
Yeah, the Maya built up such a wonderful amount of archaeology, which guess how much of that gets filtered into the creationist lexicon?
Zero?
Yeah. This is
Zero,
the symbol
I'm
everyone
zero.
can use. It's so easy. It's very simple to do. You know, there's so many questions that have the answer none in their phrase.
Oval. That's the answer.
Yeah. Anyway, the Mayas, they built theirs in layer cakes, where they would build a structure and then they would layer cake over it with a new one and then a new one and then a new one. It would get bigger and bigger and taller and taller. And so they have these large things with comb-like structures up on the top, very different, ridiculously steep stairs. I don't know how many drunk Mayans ever fell off to their death trying to get up those damn staircases and that.
Hey, free sacrifice right there.
And so a lot of
we're talking about Mesoamerica with a population of too many damn people.
Yeah, well,
they too.
They would occasionally get to things where they would run out of resources because they would be pushing their agricultural techniques, and if they slammed into a drought, the same thing happened up with the Anasazi culture, where the big drought around 1200, which is connects up with actual kind of little climate blip in the thing where things got kind of dry, a lot of different places. And some of that may have been triggered off by volcanic eruptions centuries earlier as it cascades through the climate system. Anyway, there were a lot of cultures that kind of went on the skids around the same time. And the Anasazi in 1200 AD, they just went flunk. And the people spread apart. And you eventually ended up with the Hopi and Navajo and other tribes. And one, I think the very term Anasazi is an insult term. And I can't remember whether it was the Hopi or the Navajo that called them. Basically, it was a insult name for them. And that's what we know them at. We don't know what they said.
Yeah, I think I remember my archaeology teacher saying that to us.
Yeah, I finally got to visit the Chaco Canyon site, which I've been wanting to for years. It's out in the middle of nowhere, and there's no motels or anywhere within 50, 80 miles of it. So it's a difficult place to get to. And there are a bunch of annoyed farmers that have control over the land to get to it. So they've never permitted them to upgrade the road. So you're driving across this Dust Bowl roller coaster of 1908 road to get to the area where you're actually at the federal site. And so you really got to work at it to get to there. But it was well worth it. And it was just a spectacular thing to see physically, because you didn't have a sense of how big places are and the dimensions of the thing in this vast ceremonial center. And there's a whole lost culture there because they didn't write anything down. They didn't have written languages and they didn't have inscriptions. So we don't know the who and the details of the what. We only just have the wreckage of the buildings, and they can infer the connections with later cultures, ball courts and things like that. But a lot just isn't known. And the historian in me just goes, I want to know what happened. What happened, which was, to bring the connection around, the theme I was attempting to do with our creationists yesterday. Because all I did a nasty thing, Colton. I asked for their model. I asked them to explain what their model of human origins was.
RJ, how could you? That's
You
illegal.
It's terrible.
You
RJ,
nasty,
how
sarcastic meanie who
dare
won't
you.
swallow my statements without any questioning
Yeah, how
whatsoever.
dare I actually want them to explain what they think happened when they've never thought that through and none of them had, and therefore they can't copy anybody. It's all just an anti-evolution argument, not a pro-creation argument. And so we didn't even get around to some of the exciting stuff, too much about like ALUs and all of that I did bring up.
Details, RJ, as in details.
Funky little details. But then Jesse would just fly off like a hot air balloon into the stratosphere of weird.
Yeah, I did. Did Maddox like know in advance?
Oh
her
no, I don't think
views?
they'd ever met before, and I don't know that he had actually encountered her before. I had never heard of her either. She was one of the we had like a team tag things as people dropped out, because originally it was going to be Maddox and Nephilim. Yeah.
Why does anyone do anything with
I know, but the point is he bowed out, and then somebody else was temporarily put in, and he bowed out. He apparently had kids to deal with, and so finally, he was raw mad, I think. And then they picked up this Jesse.
It scares me that he is bred.
Who he made. She made then the terrible mistake of putting a link up when everyone was exchanging websites and stuff to put on the Maddox or James's main listing. She put a little link into her videos, and so, trusting, innocent little sweet person I am, I looked to find out who hell we're dealing with. I already knew about Maddox because we'd interacted previously, but this person I didn't see, and all I needed to do was to see that first little video. It was like 8 or 10 minutes long. Nicely, beautifully done. Visuals were very nice, cribbed from creationist websites, repeating all of the usual young earth creationist dogma. And so, under the supposition, incorrectly as it turned out, that Maddox was a pure intelligent designer, he would be thinking in terms of that hundreds of thousands of year time frame for human origins, whereas the young earth creationist is thinking 6,000 years with a flood 4,500 years ago. And then I discovered, I asked him, do you dispute that? This, you're going to love this. When he was saying that, they're not at all certain about the age of Homo sapiens. Some say it's 55 million years ago. And I went,
Of
Homo sapiens.
Of our species?
Yes, I know. And I kept on saying, you mean our species? You have somebody who thinks that that's how old human beings ever were? Well, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter, Maddox kept on saying. Don't bother me about that, because I don't know whether some tiny little part of his brain is going, oops, I think we just made a mistake.
That's like older than, or that's like almost as old as the total group primates.
Yeah, well, that's what he was confusing. He was talking about the origin of the primates, not even the hominids.
Yeah.
Puffalufficus says that Maddox was so angry that you were laughing at his claims, but they were just outright laughable. Yes, they were. I mean,
RJ, my rhodometer broke.
Yeah.
How am I gonna replace this?
He was real easy to poke at, I noticed.
Oh yeah, he's got a
you don't take
huge
him
ego.
completely seriously. He gets butthurt.
Oh, he's pompous.
He's got a huge ego. Yes.
When he accused me of being sarcastic, and I says, yes, and you're pompous, you're sanctimonious. I can't live with it.
No,
I mean,
you're not
like,
supposed to
RJ,
be okay
I
with what I insult you with.
I watched your the first time we ever bumped into him when you did your debate with him a while back, and I kept dropping in and out because I was like, good Lord, he's egocentric.
No, yeah, he's absolutely convinced that. Well, he has this small battery, and thank you again, Colton, for getting me the sources. I was wondering, how big of a source list did Maddox have? Because he said I gave the link in the live chat. Well, I didn't see that, but even so, why can't you put it in your link to put?
I threw it out the window. Didn't you see it?
Because those things flit right by. It's extremely easy if you've got an awful lot of people going. Everybody who's been in there, you could be scrolls up a bunch of things as a bunch of people, like in the movie night when everyone's talking about clams, that it just goes whoop, disappears off the scope.
I don't even want to know. I don't.
But the point is why is he so reluctant? When anybody asks me about a thing, I am more than happy to put the linkage up to it, and I will throw it at you at the drop of a hat. If you want to know the Low paper on the reptile mammal transition, because it's open access from his website, I'll go flip. if you want to know about my book or our book, I'll put the links up to that. But why is it that, oh, I've already given that link, I don't need to do that again? Well, what your little fingers get all because you can't do that? I mean, why? What's so difficult about that?
He has the hand like from the guy from was it Scary Movie 2? He's like, grab my strong hand.
Or the thing that pops up in the Addams Family there out of the
Because the reason he was like, well, I put it in the live chat, it doesn't matter, or he just kept saying, no, it's out there for you to find.
Yeah,
that's characteristic of a person who doesn't want their case critically scrutinized.
Yeah, and
Surprise.
So when I finally saw this work, when I scrunch it down, it's like 2 pages. It's maybe like 60 or 70 links altogether, of which you had already noted. Some of them are evolution news.
Yeah, he claimed he cited only secular sources, but he has evolution news in there.
Yeah.
Does he not realize they're intelligent design?
And no informative description of what they are, just the web links. So, NCBMI/CMXOR. Yeah, that looks very different from the other NMCBI. That's like, what is it about? And so there's virtually no explanatory detail. It almost sounds like he's intelligently designing it to be as uninformative as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in the meantime,
Surprise.
I'm sitting here thinking, wait, those creationists said what?
I think overall,
I can break tornado again.
Watching the show, I think we got a pretty good reaction out of it. That an awful lot of people were just face palming between what we were doing. We were the ones on camera. They were the not on camera people. Oh, and in fact, somebody said that they thought they could hear John Google searching for from a quote or something.
Yeah, that's like I would not be surprised, because that's what Standing did during our debate. He like booked it over to the Answers in Genesis website and like read directly from their article on Gulo. It's like, whatever, dude.
Oh, Scientist Mel, so we did do approximately 20 shows with great guests that are always fun to go back and watch. That's hopefully the issue, what you always are doing whenever you're doing a video. And Colton, as somebody you may be getting involved with this in greater future, to remember is that you want it to be for posterity. So everything you say, you should believe. You should want it to be down the way it is. If you make a mistake, you correct it, as Dapper Dino and Apologia and others make a point of doing. You never want to have dead airtime. That's a critical factor.
Distract them with your juggling.
Yeah, well, I can't juggle, so I'm screwed.
I see 2 evolution news already.
It was 2. I only saw 1.
Oh yeah, I spotted 2 as well. So there's a bit there. He's got a Scientific American blogs. There's a couple that are obviously not technical journals. Some of them are
secondary sources.
RJ, you know what I bet? I bet he saw Evolution News and thought it was actually an evolutionist site.
I've seen that on like Twitter. People will send me links like, look at this evolutionist website. It's like, no.
Yeah. And that's the fun part, you see, of what I told Colton earlier that I was going to be doing is I'm going to be doing a spreadsheet analysis of it, a full source methods approach, which is, first off, what topics are they involved? Because so far, it's just like a list of isolated blips. What does it refer to? Some of them sound like they're on cosmology, and some of them sound like they're on you can see from the little tag that's in the linkages that it may be referring to biological subjects. That would be the first order of business. Then we're looking at what's actually the technical material versus secondary accounts. Then there's the breakdown as to what is an anti-evolution material, which we know right off the bat, there's at least 2 because of the evolution news part. Then it's the cross-hatching, which is how much of the technical material is stuff that I'm already aware of because it's already been referenced by an anti-evolutionist. And more importantly, is the stuff that he's presenting coming from the secondary sources he's alluding to, or is he hiding the material? And if you get like 3 or 4 sources all discussed in exactly the same secondary source, but you don't put up the secondary source, that would be another behavioral trait. I've noticed that a lot. Richard Milton, my scholarly poster child for scholarly incompetence, would do that, because what you do is you trawl, and Scott Hughes did the same thing. The Young Earth Creationist did the same stuff, where you would take up a source and you would vacuum the material out of it and put it in your material like you had actually read it, and you don't mention that you got it from a source you vacuumed. Well, now you're totally dependent on their bad scholarship. And I was able to determine where Use, for example, got his stuff because there was one of these oddball sources that was about a reptile mammal transition issue. It was actually, I think, a book review that dates back like to the 1970s. The problem is Luther Sunderland had this in his book, and he had a mistake as to the listing, as to the page numbers and things, and he had a mistake as to the source citation. Along comes Scott Hughes. There in his bibliography is exactly the same source with exactly the same typographical error, and Hughes never even cited it anywhere in his own book. Ooh. He had siphoned this stuff up just to pad out his little itty bitty bibliography, which I think was really big. It was like 6 or 7 pages long, Colton. It was just really massive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was thinking, didn't Monty White do that with regard to Bergman? He was like making very similar argument to Bergman from from an AIG article.
Yeah, I think something like that. I know that Ann Coulter, the harpy from hell, in her book Godless.
Tell us what you really think.
Yeah. Oh, I despise Ann Coulter. I hold her in complete contempt. Absolutely, she makes Kellyanne Conway look like a saint. Anyway, in her book Godless, that she wrote in 2006, she was railing on about the Darwiniacs, she called them. And it turned out all she had done was basically channel Bill Dembski. He was the one who was her technical advisor on evolutionary matters in there. But she clearly, at one point, had a whole, I allude to it, I think, in Evolution Slam Dunk, because she was going after the reptile-mammal transition at one point. And she was clearly making a particular argument about the jaw movement, where she decided that she could figure that out better than the biologist that she never bothered to study. And then she went off in the Cambrian, and I immediately recognized what she was doing. She had read Philip Johnson's Darwin on Trial, because that was exactly the points that Johnson had made. He had conceded the jaw transition as a narrow point, he called it. And then obviously
100 million years is pretty narrow.
Well, it was a narrow, it's just a switching of bones around. It's just nothing important. And she obviously, as a fellow lawyer, had a problem with that. So she saw that as Johnson conceding a point he shouldn't have, in her view. So she decided to take the point back, but she never mentioned Johnson. So she never cited Johnson at any point in the book. There's no references to him at all. So here she's riffing off of a completely secondary issue that I knew exactly where she was getting this thing from, and even ended at exactly the same argument that Johnson did in the source that she never mentioned. You already are aware of a lot of this method, Colton, in what you've been dealing with, interacting with the things back and forth between Henke and Ord and all the rest over geology matters, because you're doing exactly that same kind of source analysis. You know the players and what ping pongs have been batted back and forth so well that even if they don't tell you where they're getting it from, you know where they're getting it from.
Oh, RJ, Gunter Beckley penned an article over at I believe it was Evolution News.
Yeah, he's the in-house paleontologist.
Yeah, he wrote this whole article about how there are no definitive sponge fossils in the Cambrian and the Precambrian, and so I read this article. Actually, the funny thing is, most of the article is fine. He really is just trawling papers by like Antcliffe and Brazier and a couple of other paleontologists who are reviewing Precambrian sponge fossils. But at the very end of the article, he says, this is a point for the design theorists because there are no animal fossils predating the Cambrian.
Hello?
That's pretty wrong.
Yeah, there's the shoe drop.
Kimberella, Icaria, Eulingia, Caretza. It's like, what?
And no one in the regular paleontology community doubts that annelids date back to the Precambrian.
I mean, the earliest arthropod fossils date to the trace fossils date to the very start of the Cambrian.
Oh, you
There's
don't want to
no
bring up
way.
the little trace fossils. That's going to get their little brains all determined, because if they have to start thinking about what was making those little tracks, they're going to have to put metazoans into the Precambrian.
Well, right, because either these things were literally poofed into existence at the changeover into the Cambrian, or they were already around and we just don't have the body fossils.
Yeah.
Which could it be?
Strange,
Ooh,
isn't
I
it?
guess.
Isn't it the fact that really small creatures that don't have fossilizable hard parts aren't shown well in the fossil record? There's a word for a specialized deposit that relates to that. What one is that again? Let me think. Lagerstätten.
Lagerstätten.
Nope, RJ, it doesn't matter because they're not there.
Yeah, because they're not there.
None of it matters. Which is like, you have to think from his position. This is a guy who's actually trained in invertebrate paleontology
And systematics.
Yeah, and he has the gall to make an argument as stupid as there are no fossils of this group, therefore design. So I left a comment on the guy who posted this to Facebook. I said, there are no fossils of the turbularian flatworms either. Does that also mean design?
Yeah, the problem is what's so fascinating about Beckley is apparently he got religion a few years ago and jumped on the intelligent design bandwagon. He's had a perfectly fine paleontological career as a bug guy. He insect paleontology, written stuff. He's had stuff named for him and so forth. So he's perfectly fine in that respect. Although when you look at his solo work, he's just purely a classification person, that he can find a little bug wing and he will figure out what family it belongs to and write a little paper up on the systematics of it.
Systematics.
At no point does he ever step back to tell us, is anything related to anything, even within those families? What is the limit? So when he puts on his little intelligent design hat, it's as bad as Andrew Snelling doing a geology paper, and then he puts on his creationism paper, a hat, and go over to Answers in Genesis. Suddenly it's schizoid, a totally different one. Beckley functions exactly like Casey Luskin. If now we know what happened to Casey Luskin. He did not disappear. He insinuated himself into the spinal column of Gunter Beckley and is now living inside of him as a little homunculus.
He's like a mixozoan.
Yeah.
Facehugger, RJ.
Because his arguments are exact. He even would be citing Casey Luskin on biogeography issues, and he's done some videos where I'm just going, this is the best you can do as a paleontologist? It reminds me too of Kurt Wise. Wise, who should know better. We know he's a paleontologist. He knows the taxa. He knows the material. And yet when he does his apologetics, he starts turning into Mike Riddle.
Yeah, it was funny because I'd actually cited several of the papers in phylogeny that Beckley cited in the article. So I was like, I'm familiar with most of these papers, and they're perfectly fine papers. It's like, okay, so what? You know, it's a jump. It's just this complete ridiculous jump.
And I would hypothesize, if you were to ask Beckley exactly the same classification question that I asked John and Jesse, is what do you think happened? Please guide us through how many, I offered originally in my discussion, how many design events were there in the origin of human beings? Because I was under the faulty assumption that Maddox actually was an intelligent design advocate rather than a closet young earth creationist. But the point is that nobody has ever bothered to think about that. And Beckley's never going to think about the map of time matter. That's why I make such a big deal out of it, Colton. Map of time. It's a 100% failure rate. It's a diagnostic problem because literally their brains don't think chronologically. And I use the example, I had to slip it into the tail end of the story because in the after show that we had, that the chronology difference between 300,000 years ago and 6,000 years ago for the origin of human beings is like being unsure whether the Battle of Gettysburg took place in 1863 or 2002.
One of those. Definitely one of them.
I'm leaning toward the 2002 is the position that that
Thematics is
functionally.
taking.
Actually, I think long story short, it's in the same boat. I think he is also a closet young Earth creationist, but he just presents as an idea.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
what
it's an
would you
easy
call
thing to
me
do.
in terms of where I am on the spectrum, considering I'm still a Christian, but I accept the whole evolution dealio.
Theistic evolution.
I would just say,
simple as that.
yeah, I would just say evolutionist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Guilty compromiser.
And it's you find well, and there's the spectrum involved, because the theistic evolutionist is an anathema to both their houses. The intelligent designers can't stand them because they got all that evolution in there, and the young Earth creationists can't stand them because not only did they have all that evolution in there, but they have all of those long ages that make it even worse. And I bet you think like stars are billions of years old too.
Yes.
And so it's just a layering effect. But the problem with it
RJ,
is that
you never did the can rattle.
oh, thank you. Yes. Let me. Oh, yes. I must thank all of. Well, that's not so much can rattle as thanking people. Yes.
Oh,
the RJ
well, I
tip
mean, you
patrons.
call it. Well, RJ, you call it that, so I was using your term for it.
Yeah. Anyway, yes, I must thank the patrons who are the reason why I can actually pay bills and eat and do things. That our colleagues Hendril and Eric and Benjamin and Speed of Sound and Cyrus and Zeshi and researchers Travis and Ian and Ian, amazing guy. Convert Me and Eat Meal and James Fitzwater and History Minor and Ralph McFadden and Pologia and assistant researchers Mike Apple, Duranku and Todas Real. Our friends Daniel and Steve Bauman, Mary Gail Beddoes, Insects Are Cool, Devin, Miranda Reeves, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Puffalophagus, who's in the show there watching, Bo Hobo, Rasmussen, Alex Stone, and Paul Williams. And again, I will thank the legacy patrons, Jen and Jody and John and Keith and Andrew and Dyer and Yui and Mona and Brad and Daniel and Yanya and Staggles and Sun Sky Stone and Ugly Truman, Truls and Everett Vincent and Sewer Weisbaum. All of those who were able to help in one way or the other. I am constantly grateful to the fact that, given how creepy the times are financially for many people, that nobody has decided to say, I don't have any funds that I can give to old RJ this time, and pull the plug on things. And in fact, a couple have actually raised their stuff up on there. And I realized I am honored of that there are people who are willing to shell out actual scratch to help the project go along, and it benefits enormously. Everything to where I go. I alas am still a hard copy person, and therefore there is ink and printing that needs to be done, which requires ink and printer and paper and all of that. And so the ability to be able to do that and to be able to follow the threads, every one of these things is a fascinating little scholarly thing that when somebody brings up a report, they do a video or whatever, whether I'm disagreeing with it or agreeing with it, like, good gravy. Like when I look at Jackson's stuff and there's always new sources that I didn't know about that I then have to add on and process in that information. And for me, that's like being a kid in a candy store. There was just that person, Dapper Dinosaur, I think, recommended this biology student that we will drag into the realm of the apologetics. He was doing a criticism of genetic entropy. And it turns...
you happen to just talk about that. He's in the chat. And
what's he under? What's his name under?
Just a Walking Fish.
Just a Walking Fish. Hey.
Nice to meet you.
Let's see there. Hi, Just. Yay. Yes, indeed. It was an excellent, tidy little assault. And it turned out, when I went through and analyzed the material, over half of the sources that he was alluding to in there weren't in my tip data field.
And I hope he's ready for a 16-hour, 20-part series by Standing for Truth. Because he's going to inevitably get it.
I think I don't think that he can he has the capacity to do concise responses, because when we do a response over at my channel, we just put it in one video and it might be upwards of 20 minutes, but we're just going to get it all in one. We're not going to do a 4-hour conversation where we ramble about 20 different topics before actually getting to the thing.
Well, that's the fog bag problem. And
well, it's like a defense. It is a defense. You're completely insulated from criticism.
Yeah, and and I made the snotty point of ending just before the feed was concluded, we didn't actually do a conventional last words thing. So they were just, after our Q&A went on, they was just kind of stalling. So I kind of slipped in to point out, just remember, gang, that everything we're saying here won't have an effect at all on the scientists at all. They're not going to pay any attention. They're not going to change their mind based on what we just said here.
And especially what Maddox and ancient alien girl said.
God, I could just see. I suddenly am channeling my old Hellenistic Greco-Roman professor. He was the one that was Greece and ancient Rome and all of that. God, I can't even think of his name. He was an old pudgy fellow, and I think he was one of these other ones that smoked a pipe in class. This goes way back into the 1970s. This is like ancient days. I expect him to have togas and things on. Anyway, he was a real stickler of a professor, and he would have just eaten Jesse alive. It would have been hilarious. And so these it was so amusing to have Jesse trying to lambaste me because I supposedly don't know the history.
Oh, that's not a good idea.
I knew she was
Not like you have a bachelor's in history or anything. No.
I knew she was a lost cause the second she said that the secular explanations for all these artifact things is aliens.
Yeah.
When that is an outright falsehood.
That's not even remotely correct.
Yeah. But
And
don't you see, she got it from the Daily Mail and from Ancient Astronaut, who says skeptics have no explanation but aliens. And clearly, if a shitty news outlet says it, it must be the explanation.
Yeah.
It's not like they have a track record of unreliability.
You know, Tornado, you could have just stopped at "it's not even," and that would have summed it up.
It doesn't even make sense. It's like she's saying that the secular explanation is only aliens.
Yeah, I don't want to call that a lie, but I really don't know what.
Yeah, well, remember,
I can break you more.
Her secondary source offered that as the bit. That this was a thing that was discovered, and supposedly the only explanation was either it was an alien artifact from 250,000 years ago, or it was from the landing gear of a World War II fighter plane, which was the alternate interpretation. And so she puts up a picture.
Surprised how these people never know what a concretion is.
No. Well, in this case, it was just a perfectly legitimate part off of a backhoe. And it was typically. I
would love to see it polished off and see if we have like a little, number on it somewhere that's covered by mineral.
Eric von Daniken had the gall to insist, along with Giorgio, the little oddball that was with him. That's the talking head at all the ancient astronaut shows. It's so heavy. And he could be absolutely certain that it couldn't possibly be made out of aluminum. They didn't use aluminum for things like that. Do you know what Boeing aircraft are made out of?
Would it be aluminum because it's lightweight and reasonably strong?
I may have dropped the systematics on you, but you dropped Robert Byers on me, so let's call it even. How about that?
Oh, yeah. Hey, you want a little update to him?
No, please no.
Bring the stupid.
You see, Robert Byers. Oh, go ahead, dude.
Yeah. Keep that thought there. I just want to say, Just a Walking Fish says it actually his fish is a coelacanth. He wanted to keep it in the Sauropterygian family. We got lots on the coelacanth bunch in the rocks we're there, which he's going to be getting at some stage.
It actually in the next one we're going to be talking about them.
Yeah, a lot more
because the whole living fossil fiasco.
Let me give a preface on Robert Byers. For those who have lived in a cave and have never ever read a discussion on evolution anywhere in the universe, you might not have encountered Robert Byers. But sometime or else, there will be popping up. He's on my TIP website. He popped up there for a while until he got tired of me asking about the reptile-mammal transition data. And then he would be popping in Matt Herron's web blog and Talk Origins. He's all over the place. Anyway, Dear Colton has had interactions with him. And so fill us up to date on the latest saga of our incredible Robert Byers.
So Robert Byers' newest thing is that bats are just rats. They are rodents. No, Jackson,
you killed Jackson.
Jackson, put it back on. Come on, man. It gets better. All right, he's going to miss it. Oh, there he goes.
Put your headphones on. You're gonna
Jackson, it gets better.
No, it can't get better.
The change from rat to bat, where they suddenly got wings, according to Byers, took place in a single generation. So that means just a rat shat out a bat.
What? I hate
It's that
everything.
bad.
And it's
this is your fault.
evolution that has the problem with speciation.
Colton, this
Yeah.
is your fault, right? I can't believe I shouldn't
Prove
know
I'm
these
not
things.
Robert Byers. I might be.
I shouldn't know these things, Colton. This is not real.
By the way,
You'll never be able to. I don't know. Byers has always shown himself to be a largely source-free, make it up as you go along, lower echelon bullshitter.
But RJ,
creation.
there's a level. There's like standing for truth, crapping it out as you go.
Yeah.
And then there's Robert Byers.
Yeah. See, he's a new. You got to have this. So we're building a spectrum across the field.
I don't think there's a bottom.
There is no bottom, apparently.
Just when you think, well, yes, because Jessie's down there waving at us with her Greek tiles.
Yeah.
Hold on. I'm just gonna say this. Wait, he actually said that. Forgive me if it.
That's a
sounds
rats
like I'm-
with wings. Yeah.
No, I've already known that, but he said it
That-
came out
that'd
of
be
a
pigeons.
single generation.
Yeah.
Yes, he said that quite literally. You had a rat, and then in a single generation, they somehow had their morphology completely change into a bat.
Oh, and
So
that
that gave birth
mammals
to
and
a-
dinosaurs don't actually exist. They're just forms of other things.
And when he asked what the evidence for this quick change was, he said, "Go ask the bat."
Excuse me.
Go ask the bat.
the bat, yes. Go in there, put the little microphone in front of the
Now,
little bat's face.
within the same day, he mentioned how good LSD feels. So I think we figured it
that
out.
could account for a lot.
Excuse me,
drug
but I'm
overdose could account for a lot with Byers. I think that's a plausible hypothesis.
beginning to think that maybe Robert Byers might get Kent Hovind to rethink his position. You know why? because Kent Hovind says that for evidence of evolution, you have to see animal give birth to a different kind of animal. What Robert Byers just said is that an animal gave birth to a different kind of animal.
Yeah.
We're getting some wonderful reactions from the people in the audience. I think Just a Walking Fish burst into flames. BJ and Lisa for Truth, and various others are expressing things which cannot be repeated in polite company.
I'm gonna look at the live chat, damn it.
I think Byers is a bit batty.
But
Yeah.
here's the funky
Good
part,
point.
is that the kind of argument that Byers is making is implicit in the hyperspeciation models that are kind of circulating at the Ark Encounter level of modern creationism. I mean,
Aren't these the same creationists that say, "Oh yeah, evolutionists expect deer to give birth to a whale" or some garbage like that?
Yeah, something
yeah,
like that.
well, and
then-
literally,
then they literally put it forward. Oh yeah, rats gave birth to bats.
Well, keep in
Remember,
mind, I
you've
literally
got-
had a conversation with somebody a few weeks ago where he wanted to give an example of how evolutionists lie. And keep in mind, this is a guy who believes Kurt Wise. He believes that whales came from a terrestrial ancestor off the ark. So he accepts whale evolution.
Mhm.
Yet he said that whale evolution was the lie because his opponent allegedly said that there have been cases of atavistic hind limbs being found on modern whales, which is
there
completely
are.
true.
Which
It
is
happens
true,
all the
yeah.
time.
There have been, and you can find there are papers on it, like the one with sperm whales. There are
Yes.
pictures of dolphins with
Yeah.
these.
Yes, you
things.
can, and they have the proper femurs and everything. He asked for a citation. We gave it to them, and what he did was then say, "No, show me full furred, hooved cattle legs hanging off the side of a whale, or you're lying." And this is
Goalpost
the
moving.
guy. This is the guy who not only claims he accepts whale evolution when we know that was false, but he's also saying that he's going to become the next Kurt Wise.
Mm.
Bullshit.
And
Good luck with that one.
ironically, he simultaneously in his brain has that whales developed from the ambulocetids off the ark in only a few
Yes.
centuries, and not that no whale evolution has occurred at all by natural means simultaneously, when those two things are mutually contradictory.
Yeah.
And yet they're all in his brain. Why? Because it's not getting up to the put pieces together level. And that's what we found over and over again in writing The Rocks Were There. We would find that the creationist is bringing up a particular deposit, whether it's the Green River in your case, that you will go, or the Coquina Lands thing, or the various super slides and all that kind of stuff. They're looking at them as very narrow little slices. And they're not connecting it up with all the data, all the animals that you can find, all the forensic information about paleoclimates, all the biogeographical information, to where the moment you start thinking that, we had one deposit, one of my favorites in The Rocks Were There, is one where I think it was Snelling or Clary. I can't remember which one made the goof, but he was talking about a particular rock deposit where it turned out, when you looked at the various details, that there were lots of time frames going on. And they were forming crystals that form at different temperatures. So you have to have the thing, it's like baking a cake and a roast and something else in the same oven at 3 different temperatures simultaneously. What is wrong
remember,
with
as long as you've got gods sucking away the heat, you can't prove that that's not just a result of that miracle.
There are all these little cherubim with little fans.
There's literally no difference between that and the other. Yep, that's correct, Jackson. Do it.
Yeah.
Get out of the race.
Dang it! This thing never works. God.
Now, of course, the whole thing about the rats turning to bats with only one generation is contradicting the creationist claim, because the creationists are, like I said, creationists always claim, oh, you'll never see a dog give birth to a non-dog. But here, one of their very own, a young Earth creationist, is suggesting, oh, bats came from rats within one generation. So you literally see a rat give birth to a non-rat.
I was talking to somebody today who was trying to argue that like a Precambrian rabbit would also falsify creationism too, because flood models wouldn't predict that. So I had to actually trot out how no, a Precambrian rock would not be a flood deposit, because all your guys say that is miracle rock from the creation week, except for like 2 people from the 90s. And 2, you have people like Snelling who think that certain parts, like the 60 Mile Formation in the Grand Canyon, is a pre-flood but post-creation week rock where there's in situ stromatolites. So I'm explaining to him, no, it ironically wouldn't falsify your point, because you've got rocks preserved on Earth, according to your experts, where some poor little rabbit could have died on a beach and then got like swept into and laid down in there. They don't know their own models.
No creation. Well, because they don't actually have a model. They only have a cartoon of a model.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's literally the Roadrunner level of they've got the cave with the tunnel painted on it by the Wile E. Coyote. They don't actually have a road there because it's all a cartoon. Whenever you look at it, even at Snelling's level, there's a chart that we'll be riffing off in the description of in volume 2 on the flood bit. He has a pre-flood world that he has a little picture of in one of his articles, and it's just incredibly vague. There's sort of mountains somewhere, and there's some clouds, and there's kind of a coastline, but not in any detail, and there's no attempt to relate it to actual real estate. So somewhere there are stromatolites there, and somewhere there are floating forests, because he kind of accepts Wise's floating forest model, even though other creationists
wasn't he one of the ones who started pioneering it along with Wise, or was that another guy?
Actually, Steve Austin, I think.
It was Austin, I think.
Back in his Nevins days, that's another little tidbit that we wanted to make a point about, is the fact that he operated under a pseudonym. Alan Nevins, I think he called himself up until a while. And then he finally came clean and described himself as Steve Austin. So it's not quite as blatant as John Woodmarapp and Jan Pexis, because Woodmarapp, whose real name is Jan Pexis, and he actually wrote an article on teaching evolution in school for a regular science magazine. And then along comes John Woodmarapp, attacking this nasty propaganda of this Jan Pexis person teaching the propaganda of evolution in the schools. He's using himself as a sock puppet.
RG, you do realize it's 11:07, right?
Yes, it is.
That sounds.
It's actually 10:07.
Extremely
You
dishonest.
time traveling heathen.
Yeah, it's 8:07 here. Anybody that needs to leave because they're getting tired. Anyway, we
Well, no, I'm suggesting. Aren't you usually going to wrap up the show right about now?
Well, normally, how are you doing, scientist Mel? Are you ready to pull the plug on us?
I'm okay. I can last a little bit longer. I haven't fallen asleep at my desk, so it's okay.
I'm halfway there.
Yeah, it's
just
an interesting
mind blowing.
What we're trying to do with the latest debate was to try to expand that whole technique of source methods to try to focus in as effectively as possible on deploying the two main areas. One, that we have data and we are perfectly happy to share it. Second, the opponents not only have a little bit of trouble at the data level, but they really don't have a clear-cut model. So by asking them explicitly what they can do to explain the thing, not to offer the criticism of evolution, it's to offer their positive case. They're up the creek at that point. And it doesn't matter whether they're intelligent design or old Earth creationists, just like Jackson with Fazal Rana. I mean, try pinning that guy down.
And they constantly contradict each other too, because I was doing some study earlier, I was reading something by Michael Ord. It was I don't know, he had an article on creation.com complaining about how uniformitarians apparently can't explain submarine canyons because there's no underwater process which can concentrate erosion to form an erosional channel. And I was like, okay, well, one, turbidites, but I mean, I guess I can see what he's getting at. Too bad we don't say it's underwater. We say that the continental shelf is exposed, blah, blah, blah. But what I noticed after reading that, was like, wait a minute. Didn't Ariel Roth argue a while ago that currents will carve canyons underwater, and that's why paraconformities wouldn't be protected by going under sea level? Those 2 points don't connect together at all.
Yeah. Oh, no. By the way, there's a reference.
No.
It's got a funky name. I can't think of it right off the bat, but there was a just hellaciously large landslide underwater that moved an enormous amount of land, and they can track exactly what happened as it slid along, and it generated tidal waves that sloshed up onto the coast. And so they find the deposits up in there and they can date those. And it's just a delicious little setup in that. So apparently stuff can go on underwater. And then, of course, we have the whole methane hydrate matter, which is another funky little issue that pops up that may or may not have something to do with the Bermuda Triangle claims and mysterious ship disappearances.
Doesn't Neff keep going on about the whole like methane on the side of the continental shelves or something like that? I thought he brought that up in your debate with him.
Yeah, and which was an ironic thing to do because it fits in with so many fascinating stuff. It changes the buoyancy of water and all that kind of stuff. But because Neff is not exactly quick on giving his sources, it's very difficult to try to figure where exactly he's trawling his latest little blips from. And if anybody has ever spotted Nephilim actually documenting a claim, let us know, because I think it'd be like a red letter day. Put up Nephilim gave a source. And that's why I was looking forward to debating him. I wanted to discuss the odd things that he did in the.
How does anyone look forward to talking to Nephilim free? That's the real question.
Yeah, well, yeah, that shows you how
Jackson carbohydrate.
He'd made some really dumb statements on the number of genes that he was clearly riffing. He was riffing off of Jensen and Tompkins. And
you know what? I think we should ask him, hey Neff, what's an amine? What do you think an amine is, Neff? Because if he can't answer what a carbohydrate is when the word gives away what the structure is, and he's always going on about amino acids, or let's ask him what the structure of a nucleotide is.
Amino acids are not very nice acids. They're amino acids.
Yes, there we go.
They're not very
simple.
nice.
That all we needed was that scientific.
Byers updated the bat thing. Oh my god.
No.
What has he said now?
So somebody was like, wouldn't that change take at least a few hundred years? And he just said, no, just the generation, just the kids. Evolution is impossible because of claim of random mutations, etc. My way of this rat to bat change has nothing to do with random mutations, but innate triggering mechanisms like an example thread I did hear about sea creatures that change body plans when they need camouflage. So apparently a cuttlefish changing color means
Is a change in body plan. Yeah.
means a rat will shit out a
Janis,
winged bat.
Christine Janis and others were lighting into Byers over his vague use of body plan. He thinks that a marsupial has a different body plan than other mammals.
RJ, we were trying to ask him, me and an actual geologist who's on that. We're trying to ask him, how do you explain the formation of caves in limestone? And Mr. Byers says that salt caves can form reasonably quickly through the dissolution of evaporite layers. And we're like, that is completely different chemistry. What are you talking about? And he fell back to body plans as a reason to think that limestone caves.
Of course, that
speed. Because apparently caves are body plans.
I think it's all due to Legos. That would explain
Obviously. All limestone's just like Lego stacked on top.
Limestone, Lego, they both have an L. I mean, come on, it's easy.
It was body pen.
Yeah, that body plan terminology is one, and that's always hilarious when somebody bandies around the word and they have no clue what the hell it is. I suppose you could throw them off by using the German word Bauplan instead.
It's time to restart the human race.
Byers is a convincing case for the human extinctionist people.
Yeah, he is a very convincing case.
He's a good case for exterminatus.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we have exhausted the circumstances. We've caused Jackson's brain to explode over bats and rats.
Sorry, Jackson.
Poor little Jackson.
It's like, seriously, it's
When
like
you-
they're all
Yeah,
doing.
that's the proper response. Duh.
This is next level stupid.
When you bumped into somebody like Byers, they're like nailing Jello to a wall, and it's just fascinating to watch people who actually
It's
do
not
those
like
things.
nailing Jello to a wall. It's like
Tinkering
nailing
with it.
air to a wall.
Yeah.
Jello
And there's
is
lots.
will
Someone
stick.
get out the nail gun.
There are lots and lots of people in that area. They're not diligent enough to be a standing for truth. They're not capable of copying down material meticulously and regurgitating it with fidelity, which at least standing for truth does.
Yeah, you can see
Byers
where his
is
medical
like
schooling
this.
came in.
Like taking cake mix and mushing it together
Well,
with
technically,
mucilage and hurling it into an electric fan and seeing where it blows.
I mean, to be
I
fair,
still
if
want to
he's
see how a rat changing to a bat couldn't have any genetic changes whatsoever. How would it not have mutations?
well,
That
to be
not a
fair,
mutational
if he's like a nurse or something, then all he would need is an associate's, in which case he would need like almost zero biology, almost zero chemistry, and so pre-med, just the pre-med track with an associate's, and then like going into the actual practice, and so he really doesn't need all that much science. So
what I hope to get more
teaches you how to memorize things. You have to remember.
What I want to
dosages
have
and
more and
things like
more.
that.
well, sure, yeah,
doing
sure, yeah.
I think that explains why he does that.
is to get more and more people using that explain your damn model approach. Force them onto the turf to explain what they think happened instead of just simply offering the criticism of evolution thing. Because every one of us has known that the vast majority of the arguments that anti-evolutionists put up is not presenting their own argument. It's just snarking at the conventional explanation as somehow absurd. And therefore, theirs is true by default without really explaining much about it. So in every area, with just as you have done in geology, Colton, and Jackson will do with biological examples, and I try to do with my little affectation of paleontology and also history, those Mesoamerican pyramids and stuff, is to pick an area to work out a question that literally they have never thought about. So there's nobody for them to copy. So they have to think through on their own, which like they're going to do on the fly. And you'll notice how Maddox and Jesse just fled from that. There's no section in their brain where they have a well thought out conception where they can just drop it on us. Well, since you asked, and then they would explain it. But no, they're up the creek when you do that.
Okay, Nepicros, I really hope you're just I really hope you're just joshing us.
Oh, he's screwing around in the chat. To quote, I will shred every field of science in order to give Corporal a headache.
No,
Oh, please.
I think he has a much higher tolerance for stupid than I do, because you sadistic monster, you have fun with the Robert Byer stuff. I would just say you're an idiot and I'm done, and I would
Well,
just leave.
I'm
Oh, I don't think that I'm better than them. I know that I'm better than them.
No, I mean
And
you have a
that's why I
higher
just-
tolerance.
That's why I
for it.
think that I can just
yeah,
bat
just
them
don't
around.
think it. No, it's not a hypothesis. It's just an objective thing.
No, I mean, Colton, I'm saying you have a higher tolerance for it than I do.
Oh yeah.
I would just be like, no, because
My
that idiot on Twitter who said bats are birds and whales are fish, and I was like, bye.
Yeah. What I'm always doing, and the only reason I stick out some of these discussions longer than common sense would indicate, is if I'm trying to ascertain, I'm trying to map them out on the spectrum of belief in the source field. Because for me, it's extremely valuable to figure out where they're getting their crap from. Are they making it up as they go along, Robert Byers type? And we encounter a lot of those. Or are they a trawler of material, but they're not wanting to tell you where? But they are in fact simply regurgitating a secondary material. That's a difference. Or are they actually a fact claimant? Those types you don't usually encounter on social media. Steve Austin will only debate somebody who has a geology degree. There's all these little things that they get into. Steve Meyer is apparently on Twitter, but doesn't seem to tweet much.
Interestingly, Inspiring Philosophy sent me a video that Meyer was at a big event where him and a bunch of other apologists, like including William Lane Craig and a whole bunch of apologists, were all kind of together talking about like science and religion and all of that. And I don't know, it's kind of disturbing.
You could
to see the
probably
crosstalk.
shovel up the sanctimony there with a trowel.
It's kind of disturbing to see the crosstalk, because it's like, because I appreciate Inspiring Philosophy. He was there, and interestingly, he asked a very interesting question of Meyer, which Meyer totally dodged.
Surprise!
But I know, but it yeah.
But no, their demographics are going to be very different. The William Lane Craig Steve Meyer worldview is generic John Lennox style, intelligent design. God is just fine, and is not too much that we have to deal about. All kumbaya. So you'll have Catholics and Protestants and Jews all together. No Muslims probably in that network. They're relatively politically conservative. They may spill over slightly towards the Tony Perkins network, and there might even be some young Earth creationists there, but they'll keep it under wraps. They won't.
It's funny because I saw from the video that Frank Turek was sitting on the front row, so in the audience. So
Well, he's another. I think I put him.
Actually,
in the
I do think he's an idea.
camp.
Yeah, he's another Steve Meyer.
Lee Strobel falls into the ID camp. And that's where this source methods matters, Colton, the reference listing, because it's you find the camps. Intelligent design remains very insular. It's extremely rare for an intelligent designer to cite outside the canon. So you're not going to even find them varying even as far as a Richard Milton typically. They're not going to be citing a Dwayne Gish book, and except if they do, that's revealing. That when a Bill Dembski will cite a Henry Morris book from the ways past or something, you're going, oh, interesting example. Why are you bringing that up in a thing? Meanwhile, Answers in Genesis, they have, and ICR, they have their own little area. They'll tiptoe into intelligent design when it's convenient. So how many biologists do they really have available for some of these things? If they can dragoon a Behe in there.
I think they have like Tompkins and a few obscure people.
Yeah,
that's it.
And so they tend to keep it in-house, but they once in a while will allude to Behe, especially if he's got a big bestseller book out, because they can kind of hitchhike off that. But they will invariably point out, footnote, he has a problem because he accepts the long ages kinds of things.
Right. Yeah,
So
there's always the footnote in there of, he's not that great.
Then you got the smorgasborders who have no clue. All they see is intelligent design is anti-evolution, and Harun Yahya is anti-evolution, and Answers in Genesis is anti-evolution. And so they'll, oh, that looks good, and that looks good, and I think I'll have some fries with my Clary, and they'll just piece together
I want some fries
a
with
bouillabaisse. And
no,
you'll
no, no,
find
no,
this,
no. I know what it sounds like. I know what it actually sounds like. Hello, I'd like a Hoven burger. I'd also like a little bit of Behe fries and maybe an AIG cola.
yeah. And that's exactly what you get at a lot of websites that you can see that they are usually a mom and pop operation. There's somebody that got the buzz. They're Christian and they've decided that evolution is a crock, and so they're linking around. So they'll have their little spiel where they're arguing their main points. They're usually not terribly specific or doctrinal. They may not be explicitly railing on about the age of the earth or not, or particular things. They'll just kind of float in a generic kind of a thing. And then you'll see their references that they put their links up, and they're so proud of them. Oh, they'll have a whole little page of the links, and then you can go down and look through them, and you're going, oh my God, there's Dwayne Gish, and then there's Philip Johnson, and you know the books that they would like, and it's a total incompatible mishmash to you, where you wonder how many of them have they actually read? Do they even know what the hell this thing is going on? So those are operating in a different frame than you do when you're dealing with the technical ideologues higher up on the food chain, like our Jensen. And then below that smorgasbord level is where you encounter your Robert Byers types, who
way below,
they're just floating in a mess because of the same group when that trope. And I've been fascinated to try to pin down when it started to emerge, the ones that claim dinosaurs are fake, because that's not an anti-evolution position. There's no serious young Earth creation.
Christians against dinosaurs, that whole group.
Christian Eau Claire and that whole group.
Yeah, and they're partly like homeschoolers. There's apparently a little subgroup. I've heard quite a few popping up from Seventh-day Adventist homeschoolers, that sort of thing.
Well, you know, I'm not. It honestly seems, because I watched the stream with Trevor Valley on the non-sex show, I really do think a number of them, I think a lot of them are like flat earthers. They're trolls. They're doing this for
it's very
the
possible.
kicks.
And that's why, again, everybody, whoever is listening to this and whatever connections everybody has on that, if anybody has additional information on that, let us know and connect up on it, because it's really rare. So this is a tiny little niche thing. This would be like trying to analyze the ones who are the flat earthers who believe the South Pole is the center of things, not the North Pole. and you know, it's just a tiny little subset of things. But the fact is that you do bump into them every once in a while. And so you have to wonder, where are you seeing a new trope that's basically materializing right under your nose? Just in the same way that the moon landing hoax people didn't exist in 1850 because there were no moon landings. So you have to have a reaction to a new phenomenon. So this one is one that, as far as I know, none of the upper level creationists have ever alluded to it. And eventually they might have to put, you'll know when it becomes a serious problem, when AIG puts adds this to the arguments that creationists should not use list, which the creationists will pay no attention to.
Yeah,
Hey, Robert
don't
Byers,
use the Darwin I quote. Whoops.
Wait, they actually stopped using. They actually tell everyone to stop using the Darwin I quote.
That's one of their. That's one on their list. That one and the
lunar dust myth is one they say you
stop
shouldn't
using
use.
the why are there still monkeys argument.
Yeah.
There are a couple of others.
Yeah.
Which Ken Ham himself.
Paluxy River. The Paluxy River is something the ICR and others do not recommend making use of. There's even though quite a few of them really hope they're going to find Noah's Ark somewhere, still most of the time they say kind of steer clear of that issue because we've been burned so often on it.
I want to add in something interesting. Basically the whole thing of, oh, if humans evolved from apes, then why are there still apes? And then it's like, because humans are apes. So as long as there are humans around, there's always
complex.
Going to
You're
be
making
apes.
eyes
Well,
glazed over.
You know what's funny? You know what is funny is actually the why are there still monkeys argument. PZ made a very good point with his most recent video is the argument that long story short channels for the whale evolution thing. Oh, Indohyus is found after Pakicetus. That's the why are there still monkeys argument. The same with Stephen Meyer's at Darwin's Doubt when he says, oh, but Pikaia and Hycoichthyes and the basal deuterostomes like Vetulicolians, oh, they're all found at around the same time. So if these are the ancestors, then why are they still being found? Still the why are there still monkeys argument.
Which I described as partly the Bermuda Triangle defense. And Myers went even further in that stupid Explore Evolution book, which I went into in Evolution Slam Dunk. His argument, or their argument, because he was co-authoring it, was Paul Nelson and a bunch of other people. Scott Minnick, I think, was one of the co-authors. Anyway, their argument on why the reptile-mammal transition data is a problem simultaneously is that they're trying to argue that it's all taking place in one location, and that it's not taking place in one location, it's taking place all over the planet. So for those reasons, that it has to be wrong.
It's both in one place and everywhere.
Yeah, and therefore it's wrong. And this was like on alternating pages, and I'm going, have you forgotten what you wrote on the page before?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
The stupidity is both inside the box and outside the box.
I'm supposed to be impressed with scholarship like that.
It's just kind of amazing that, like, when you really get down to the core of it, when you get to the core of their arguments, the ideas are no different from the young Earth creationists. There's no difference there.
Methodologically, they're all shaking out the same bag. What's different is the veneer of which fields they go after, which is why Evolution Slam Dunk is a smaller book, even though it's on a very tight subject matter than The Rocks Were There, because the young Earth creationists trample everything.
Yeah, they do, and we get to explore. Because this past one was really just geology, biology, and paleontology. The next one's going to cover space and even history too. So.
Ooh, you guys are getting into space?
Oh yeah. Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars.
Oh boy.
That's the chapter on their cosmology.
Oh my god.
Oh yeah, and we're gonna have all that stuff on the origin of tetrapods and the material on human origins, because that
and
then we
feathers. We're going to talk about because David Menton is the gift that keeps on giving. I love
No,
that
that's
man.
Robert Byers. That's the gift that keeps on giving.
Robert Byers is like what you have to clean up in the bathroom when the clog happens.
No,
That's
Robert Byers is the gift that keeps on giving
because
people aneurysms.
Menton is juicy because he gives sources.
Yeah,
he discusses specific details in a way Byers never does. You can't get him to specify anything. No, Menton shoots himself in the foot and every other extremity.
And a good example is in his chapter. So in the AIG book 1, Menton says there are 2 total feathered dinosaurs, and they're both flightless birds. One is Caudipteryx. I think the other is Protarchaeopteryx.
And when was he writing this little
in the lecture? I don't remember how. It was at least several years ago, but
we can wrap
probably
this up,
2013.
I was actually starting to fall asleep in
but
my
then
bed a little bit.
in the lecture he just gave that Dapper Dino posted that he gave a little while back, he says the Dromaeosaur in Zen 1 long is exactly like Archaeopteryx. So, oops.
Well, what is it? Meanwhile, we have a list in our book of 35 feathered theropod genera.
So
and to be perfectly honest, by the end of the year, it'll probably be 36 going by current discoveries and such.
Oh yeah, constantly. And we were really parsimonious. We did not list a single taxon that is inferred to have feathers because its close cousins are.
Right.
We deliberately restricted them exclusively to examples where there are literally feathers in the fossil itself.
Jackson,
so
but Jackson, those dinosaurs are just oversized turkeys and lazy ostriches. Don't you listen to Byers?
Clearly, no more than the bats.
At least since they have finally, if with Menton, if they say, okay, well, anything with feathers is a bird, meaning that now pterosaurs and even ornithischians are now birds. At least they're consistent, right?
Yeah,
at least they have consistency.
I tell you, it's going to happen. You're going to reach a point in like the 22nd century or so when the young Earth creationists are going to declare that everything is one gigantic monobaramin, and
at that point we'll say, welcome to the club.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I think that kind of finishes up. We can end out on a little bit of a joke here. We've gone a half hour overtime on here. Thanks, Colton, for showing up, and thanks, TD, and thanks for helping on the post-mortem of the exciting thing. And thank you, Colton, for frying poor Jackson's brain on Byers and the bats.
He's not the only brain eating fried.
You can cut us down this time, Mel.
We'll fry your
Thank
brain
you very
more
much for
movie night.
again.
You could serve mine up with bacon.
Yeah.
I'm
Good
gonna
night,
take off.
guys.
Good night.
Thanks, Mel.
Wheat and
Thank you.
eggs.
Oh, well, nice you just don't walk the pitch.
I'm gonna take off. Bye.